What's up, everybody? Celtic Scarecrow back with another video. Get those 10s and 20 views. Today we are doing another reaction and another Dylan Hollis video called Food for the Gods. I'm doing this video for 3 reasons. 1, both the good and the bad recipes have just blown up on my channel. 2, this is a suggestion by Arthur Newell, not sure how you pronounce it. And 3, Dylan Hollis commented on my video. Consider me cuffed, which I probably referenced something I said in the video, but I am an idiot. Which is super cool, as the first time someone that I reacted to commented on my video. So, really cool. But I do say, if you got something you want me to watch, send me a thing. I'll check it out. And like I said, the other video did so well. Food for the Gods. The 40-minute long video. So let's just jump right into it. And let's go.
Gentles and ladies, oh, that was my rear. Welcome back, welcome back to the kitchen, gentles and laymen. My name's Dylan Hollis, and I say, if I told you there was an old school mysterious dessert called Food for the Gods, would you have a clue what I'm going on about? Well, I certainly didn't, or rather had not, until
I would think, some Viking dinner, like, this is the food of the gods. Stuff.
I plastered my peepers upon this unit right here. Yes, this ancient text is certainly among my top 5 favorite books on cookery, not only because it possesses the ominous title of Michigan Federation Cookbook, but also because it is 114 years old, and it's a community cookbook. You know how feral I am for those. However,
basically, a bunch of people from Michigan got together and put recipes in it. Okay, they're cold, they're bored. Can't play hockey all the time, so okay, let's see what they're doing.
Despite being made aware that Food for the Gods is a thing, recipes are typically named in a fashion that allow us to deduce what the dish is going to be, i.e. a recipe for chocolate chip cookies is likely to be a cookie, and a carrot cake recipe is hopefully going to be a cake. Failing that, you look at the list of ingredients and infer from such. This recipe is truly puzzling, as it has neither. The name is tremendously undescriptive, as food is the bare minimum for edible substrate, and the ingredients list is puzzling to say the least. To make matters worse, I found several instances of desserts calling themselves Food for the Gods amongst my old cookbook collection, each with their own unique ingredients list and unique take on the method, leaving us completely up in the air as to what on earth it is.
Well, probably because there are multiple gods throughout mythology, so Norse, Greek, Irish, Scottish, Egyptian, Central American, so different gods like different foods. But they all probably like ale, though.
So naturally, why don't we strap in and bake a handful of these, huh? We'll be starting with the 1909 recipe, then we'll be fast-forwarding a half century and baking a 1961 iteration. After that, how about we ask the internet as to what on earth Food for the Gods is?
That's a bad question. You don't want to ask the internet questions.
And then finally, we will be baking a recipe from my cookbook. Yes, that's right, the cat's out of the bag, and I couldn't be more excited to tell you that I have my own cookbook called...
You've been telling us you had your own cookbook, and I've been leaving a link in the description so people who find this video through me somehow can click in and order it. Probably should order one for myself.
Baking Yesteryear. It comes out this July everywhere books are sold. It's available for pre-order now, and I'll go ahead and plaster those links all over the place. Honestly,
same here, it's in the description.
it's going to be so much fun. Oh, so that's where you've been. I said, yes, I've been writing a cookbook. Sorry about that. But that was now, and this is then. How about we start by opening up the pages of this here Michigan Federation cookbook? Now, the Michigan Federation is not some strange spin-off of the Illuminati. No, rather, it is the MSFWC, which is a mouthful, and you say, Dylan, that is tremendously helpful. What on earth is it? And it is the Michigan State Federation of Women's Clubs, a member of the still extant General Federation of Women's Clubs, and this particular chapter dates back to as far as 1895, which I suppose in the context of this book is not that long. As you see, it is dated September of 1909 with the opening statement, "To the Club Women of Michigan, the homemakers and homekeepers of our state, this little book of rules for good cookery is dedicated. May its usefulness ensure, with an I, its welcome into every home." That is tremendously formal. Anyway, enough rambling and on to the subject at hand. Our food for the gods recipe falls under the classification of puddings. And if I turn the page, you can behold the glory written by a Miss Cora Tullis Reed from Benton Harbor. And as was typical for the time, you can see that we do not have a separate list of ingredients followed by a method.
So we got 6 eggs, 2 cups of sugar. There's no way, like, do we just throw it all into one bowl?
No, everything's condensed into paragraph form, which to be honest, I quite prefer depending on what it is I'm making. But alas, we start with the whites of 6 eggs, followed by 2 cups of sugar, 6 tablespoons of cracker crumbs. What cracker they mean, we have no idea. It might even be me. Next up is 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a cup of chopped English walnuts, and 1 cup of cut dates. Do you see what I mean? Just precisely what this is not easily inferred. But that's not going to stop us from getting some eggies. Welcome to the famed countertop, where I prepare my meals alongside the oft disastrous TikToks. But before we beat up our whites of the eggs, as the book so calls, we're going to wipe down our vessel with some white vinegar. I'll admit that I do not clean this countertop for TikToks, but I did just clean it for YouTube, so I reckon I must think more highly of you folks. But anyway, we wipe this.
Yeah, I guess YouTube you can go a lot longer than what the 60 seconds that normally is. Whatever TikTok, I don't know. I don't YouTube things.
Down with white vinegar just to get rid of any residue or fats that can prevent your egg whites from being beaten up stiff. Time for eggies. You know, I used to separate my eggs one at a time, but I have since become converted to this method, whereby you crack everything into one vessel and then grip up the yolkies. Do you hear that murder of crows outside? Are they trying to, like, take down a deer?
They may be warning you. That could be the truth.
I must say, though, I love my wooden spoon and my whisk. When it comes to beating egg whites stiff, I am a user of mixers.
We skip ads here. No need to make this video any longer than what it already is.
All right, this is stiff, or at least stiff enough by my standards. And you'll see that the next instruction is not an instruction. It just says 2 cups of sugar. So we don't know whether that means to fold it in or to beat it in. But typically with egg whites and meringues, you beat in the sugar with the...
Called it.
Your beaters, or back in the day with your whisks. So we're going to do that. We're also going to do that gradually. Cup number 2. All right, that is 2 full cups of sugar beaten in, and as you can see, it's really quite thick and candy-like at this point, but we don't know what the recipe writer wants. We don't know if they want us, to beat this further to stiff peaks with the sugar in, or just move on as is.
You should have taken a photo of it for your zoom in.
My gut tells me to beat this a little bit stiffer, and then we'll prepare everything else. Stiff! Now, the next ingredient requires us to make a little bit of an executive decision, because it just says 6 tablespoons of cracker crumbs, meaning 6 tablespoons of soda cracker crumbs, saltines as we know them, or 6 tablespoons of graham cracker crumbs. The National Biscuit Company, Nabisco, was already mass-producing graham crackers by 1898, and the same was true for saltines in the 1870s, so it could go either way. But truthfully, I'm of half a mind to say that it is soda crackers, because if they wanted graham crackers, they would have specified, but I suppose that argument works both ways. But we're going to go with graham cracker crumbs today.
Speaking of pudding or a pie?
It's not a bad assumption, and you'll see why a little later. Plus, graham crackers were all the rage in the 1900s and the 1910s. Sylvester Graham really had a hit on his hands. Now, as you can see, 6 tablespoons is not a lot. That's a mere tablespoon of crumbs, a tablespoon of dry ingredients per egg white. But even more perplexing is the addition of 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Does anyone have any idea as to why this is in here? Not only is the ratio strange, but with all the air in the egg whites, I don't see the point. I do, however, see the point in nuts and dates. They are both lovely, especially when the former comes after the latter. Here come the dates. The secret with these is just to use scissors. It is so much easier, and your knife doesn't get all gunky. Alrighty, with our cup of dates, that means we have all of our ingredients set up, but I want you to notice how, again, we don't have any instructions on how to mix everything together. But further than that, we have no instructions on just what to bake this thing in. It could be anything. So I've made the decision to preheat the oven to 300 degrees, because that's what slow means. And for mixing everything, we're going to start by folding in our crumbs, our dry ingredients, followed by our add-ins. And for the pan, I have chosen a 12-inch springform, because I think that's the best size for the amount of meringue that we have. So into our...
Yeah, you ought to be really like... My dad always says cooking is a science. That's just like, all right, here's how we make... It's like almost like alchemy. All right, we're going to turn lead into gold. How? Don't know.
stiff meringue goes the dry ingredients, and as we fold, it is going to deflate because meringue does not take lightly to visitors. And then in goes the dates and the walnuts. That actually does look quite good. It's a bit like divinity. Then we are going to gloop this into our spring form with a parchment round. Now, could 12 inches be too big? Could it be too small? I have no idea, but this is nearly 7 cups of batter? 7 cups of goop. So I don't know. I could be wrong, yes. Could they have provided a size? Yes. Do we smooth it out? I don't know. We could do anything. There aren't any rules. I am
I would kind of teeter-totter it so it does knock out some of the air, but that's just me.
grateful that it tells us the temperature and the time, but again, without specifying the size of the bakeware, that could mean nothing. But anyway, 300 degrees, that's in Fahrenheit, for a half hour. Good night. With our first food for the gods in the oven, I just wanted to share with you another example from the Michigan Federation Cookbook, which gives a perfect account of what I mean by how strange the recipes can be written using strange units of measurement. It's just bizarre. So if we turn to page 37, under the candy section, you'll find an entry called molasses candy, the premier recipe of this section, and it goes as follows. To every teacup of brown sugar, take 1 large kitchen spoon of molasses. Butter half the size of an egg, cream tartar size of a pea. Boil without stirring till it hardens in water. Just before taking off, like a plane I suppose, add 1 tablespoon of vanilla. Pour on buttered tins and pull when cool. I mean, if you didn't know you...
I'm dyslexic and I sent some weird cryptic text messages by accident. I'm confused.
way around the kitchen, you would be hopeless. I would not be able to replicate that, I'm sure of it. Now for that, let's see what we've got here. Oh, are you ready for the big reveal? The grand finale. It's food for the gods! So, what do you think? It's just a bit of a white mass, isn't it? And it's deflating as we speak, so...
Well, it's white like clouds, so gods live up in the sky, so...
We're gonna let this cool down, decouple it, and then find a way to eat it. Alright, this is going to crack, it's just part of the game. Also, if you're curious, yes, this pan is closer to 11 inches than it is to 12. We call that Amazon sizing. Come on, let's go! Please cooperate. Whoa! Minor casualty. Don't let that upset you, because as you'll see, as soon as you try and cut it, that will happen anyway. See, even completely cool, it is just... It's strange. It is a poofy meringue, but underneath it is, of course, gooiness. Which leads you to say, oh, did I do it wrong? But then you must remember, this was in the pudding section. We are to eat this with whipped cream.
Well, it's a pudding, yeah.
So despite how it looks, it tastes really quite nice. It's got my favorite flavor profile, which is sweet, dates, and nuts. But it's just, well, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Looks horrendous. For one, we will never know what consistency this was supposed to be without a specified size of bakeware. 300 degrees Fahrenheit could be anything. If you're baking little meringue cookies, 300 degrees Fahrenheit for a half hour, they'll be quite hard and firm. But if you're using like a 9-inch springform pan, it'll be even more goop than this. What makes me think that this was not supposed to be hard and firm again was the fact that it was in the pudding section. Secondly, it definitely was too sweet without any salt to cut it, and personally, it didn't have enough structure. I don't know what the point of the graham cracker crumbs was, but it was certainly lost. But I am not lying to you when I say that this horrible, horrendous, ugly-looking dessert has an exceptionally awesome flavor, so much so that I desperately wanted to make it work. I must have baked this recipe from the Michigan Federation Cookbook 24 times, changing the baking time, the baking temperature, the size of the pan, the ratio of the ingredients, using saltine cracker crumbs, using graham cracker crumbs. I went full ham, and then I began scouring my old cookbook collection behind you for recipes of the same name.
Like I said, it's science. Sometimes you gotta just wing it.
Right, folks, listen up. It's 1961. Specifically 1961, in the small town of Lindsborg, situated in the north of McPherson County, Kansas. A town known as Little Sweden, because very nearly a third of its inhabitants are of Swedish descent. But within Lindsborg is the private Bethany College, and the Bethany College's auxiliary program put out this here cookbook titled Measure for Pleasure. And I gotta tell you, it's an interesting one, not only because it's massive, covering a whole range of salads to appetizers to main meals to desserts, but because it has Swedish desserts and like Scandinavian classics sprinkled amongst American dishes. It's very bizarre.
Definitely the gods of the, for Valhalla than this one.
But for our purposes, it is interesting because on page 191, we have none other than a food for the gods recipe. And upon us taking a gander, you can see, well, it's completely different.
Well, still got the nuts and dates, 3 eggs, cup of sugar, and actual instructions. Thank God.
If we start in the rightmost column, we now have some salt, 1/8 of a teaspoon, which is a measurement you don't see very often, mostly because, well, it's useless. We have egg yolkies now. That's new. Half the amount of eggs, though. We also have half the amount of sugar, and it's now in powdered form. The egg whites we're familiar with, and we have some added flavor.
So just say 3 eggs.
With a teaspoon of vanilla. Moving to the leftmost column, gone are the cracker crumbs, and in its place is flour, 2 tablespoons. It's important to note that the abbreviation for tablespoon wasn't quite standardized yet, and in many ways still isn't. So this book uses an uppercase T for tablespoon and a lowercase t to denote teaspoons.
Hopefully that's in like somewhere written like, hey, this is what this is, this is what this is.
Speaking of teaspoons, we have 2 teaspoons of baking powder. That makes a return despite the small amount of flour, as does a cup of walnuts, specifically English walnuts, and again, our friend, a cup of dates. So looking at this ingredients list, it's a bit like looking at the child of a friend that you know very well, right? They're their own unique person, but you can see features of the parent sprinkled throughout. In our case, we have baking powder, English walnuts, and dates, alongside the small amount of dry ingredients compared to wet. However, this Food for the Gods ingredients list from 1961 resembles a pudding even more so than our first 1909 recipe, despite the fact that that was situated within the puddings section. And when I say puddings, right, I don't mean the American understanding of puddings, like Jello puddings, like custard consistency. I mean the greater family of dessert puds, everything from like creme brulee, souffle adjacent desserts, all the way up to boiled or steamed affairs like figgy pudding or sticky toffee pudding. This ingredients list upon first glance, I would call a baked pudding, or a sponge, we would call it in the Commonwealth. But unlike sponges and baked puddings, this does not have any fat nor milk. This is in a class of its own. I say, let's explore.
Like I was about to say, but the rude ad cut me off. Food of the Gods, round 2.
Our first instruction is to mix together flour, baking powder, nuts, and dates.
So far, so good. Why is he holding bananas?
So look at the size of these bananas. I don't know where you Americans are getting these things. I have seen smaller plantains. In goes 2 mere tablespoons of flour, 2 teaspoons of floof powder, as I want to call it. Once again, I'm being a miser and only using regular walnuts. The perennial addition of the date. Now, despite the fact that the 2 recipes we've looked at thus far both specify dates, I actually have 2 other recipes, both from 1909 and both from Boston for Food for the Gods, that don't specify this. These 2 recipes are quite fond of dates. So this is our flour, baking powder, nuts, and dates all mixed up. So now we're moving on to the eggs. We're to start just with the yolks. So let's crack everything into this one, and then we will pull the yolks. Come on, Yoki. Now we need to beat these 3 egg yolks together with 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, which is what, half of a quarter teaspoon. So it's just 1 or 2 little grains. And we beat until lemon colored.
Take about like 10 seconds.
It's already lemon colored. Yeah, it's lightened up a bit. Then we have a cup of powdered sugar. Now this is an interesting addition because powdered sugar has some added starches like cornstarch in there, which gives like a chewy texture unto the things that it's added to. So let's see where this goes. Oh, it's getting thick. All right, it is quite thick and custardy at this point, which means we're moving on to the beating of our egg whites, and we'll fold that into here with our vanilla. Hello, old friend. Now, if you're curious as to why it's asking us to fold in our beaten egg whites separately into our beaten yolks and sugar instead of, just beating together the whole eggs and the sugar in one bowl, it's because this contains thousands, millions of little tiny air bubbles that would not have formed if we beat it together with the yolks, because the yolks contain a fat that would stop this from forming. You'll see this in a lot of old school cake recipes where you would make a cake batter with the yolks and butter and sugar and, all of those standard batter things. And at the very end, it would ask you to beat the reserved egg whites and fold it in normally in 3 additions. It creates airiness, lightness, like an angel food cake-esque texture, but this is not a cake. So
Something I did not know, and I'll have to pass on to my father, who actually just baked the cake for my mother, who day of filming, it is her birthday. So you're seeing it. It's yesterday was my mother's birthday.
Let's see where this goes. We will fold this in. And then the rest. You see how fluffy and foamy and poofy this is? This would not occur if we just beat the whole eggs together with the sugar. Teaspoon of
Thank you for answering the question I threw out earlier.
vanilla. Fold this in. And then finally, our first mixture. It's different. Now it's asking us to put this into a 10-inch square pan. And you bakers out there will be sharing in my confusion because that's not really a size that exists. Or at least, not a size that we're familiar with.
It could exist at one point. If I seem distracted because they had the NFL Network on in the back and they're talking about who should the Panthers draft at number 1, and so just catches my eye.
Normally with square pans, we deal with 8-inch or 9-inch. There are 10-inch, cake pans and 10-inch spring forms, but not squares. So I do have a 9 by 11 inch greased pan here, which is the same surface area essentially. So we'll be using that. Oh boy. Okay, it's not giving us a time, but we are to bake this at 350 degrees Fahrenheit until it pulls away from the sides of the pan or until it's done with a toothpick test.
The toothpick test. Stick it in, as long as nothing sticks to it, you're good.
You go, and instead of a timer, we'll do a stopwatch. So as we watch this like a hawk, I did want to share with you the fact that even though this is from 1961, it is indeed a facsimile, so it isn't. The first edition was in 1961, it had a second edition in 1970, and this is the third 30th anniversary edition, printed in 1991. And the Bethany College in Lindsborg, as well as the Bethany College's auxiliary, still exists. So technically, if I use these reorder forms at the back of this book, it should not go unanswered. All right, it is pulled away from the edges and the toothpick is clean. Pretty solid, though. We're gonna let this cool completely and not poke any more holes in it because our serving instructions are a bit unique. You ready? Come on!
Man versus food. This is the real struggle.
Because to serve, we are to break this into bite-sized pieces, place in a sherbet glass, and top with whipped cream. So break into pieces physically, not cut. And I don't own a sherbet glass because I'm not 98 years old. Just looks like burnt croutons.
You like old-fashioned things? You don't have a sherbet glass? Come on.
I can't say that this looks appetizing. So if you're curious,
Near did your last concoction, but
the bake time was around the same as last time, half an hour, albeit this was at 350 and not 300. And cooled down completely. This is certainly firmer and more crispier meringue-like top, but really quite an eggy bottom. And I'll tell you, this smells eggy as well. So let's serve this with whipped cream. I have this stuff, which really is not that bad. It's the Cool Whip that you got to look out for. I'm not quite sure what Cool Whip is, but this is just aerosolized. Let's go.
all right, here we go. Predictions? I have no idea.
Yeah. No. Now you see, I am not a fan of this one. It's eggy in that it smells eggy, it tastes eggy, even when completely cooled, and it feels eggy. It's
Was it written by Dr. Eggman?
rubbery and chewy in a manner that's not quite appealing. And I'm just not quite sure what it's trying to be. I mean, serving crumbled up, like crusty things with whipped cream on top. Have you ever had a dessert look like that? And for whatever reason, that...
Hold on a second. My foot fell asleep. It's like... Hold on a second.
A few moments later.
I'm back. My foot is slightly more awake. But yeah, due to the fact that I'm just a poor boy and nobody loves me, and I paid off my student loans, unlike most people. I'm saving up money to buy a house or waiting for the house / wait for the house market crash. So I still live at home with my parents. Limited space means I'm doing this all kind of sitting on my bed, which means I don't have a lot of leg space. So it fell asleep in the middle of this video. But let's get back to him explaining why this version of the Food of the Gods was not tasty. But I did also, while walking around trying to wake my foot up, gone and got a Pepsi. And no, they don't sponsor me. If you want to sponsor me, I would gladly take it.
Present here, it's lost. And the vanilla is not making itself known, and overall just making it a strange dessert. And it has the consistency and like the taste almost of an omelet. And I don't want that in my desserts. Now, if you're anything like me, you would say that this Food for the Gods was baked for too long, and the first recipe wasn't baked for long enough.
Maybe it's food for Loki. You ever think of that, good sir? He would find it funny. Bake me this weird dessert and eat it. I'm not going to touch it. It's god awful.
However, this did not begin to pull away from the sides of the pan, nor be able to have a toothpick be removed cleanly until it reached this point. So although this was an interesting stop on our journey through food for the gods, it's not a stop I'm inclined to stay at for too long. Yeah, it's just weird. Which is why now we are moving on to the internet. We're gonna ask Google as to what it thinks Food for the Gods is, because despite my love for old cookbooks, I can't deny that the internet is now the preeminent repository for...
Let's look at his stickers. We're judging a man based off stickers alone. All right, so we have Jackson's Hole. Now you want to take a gander at that. What looks like polar bear from We Three Bears and a stack of pancakes. Some type of pie.
We're gonna ask Google.
Forks, Wyoming. Laura, Wyoming. Did you move to Wyoming, sir? That is my next question.
As to what it thinks Food for the Gods is, because despite my love for old cookbooks, I can't deny that the internet is now the...
Is Jack's Hole that high up? Okay, then. Feel bad for that guy.
preeminent repository for recipes. And it'll likely return to us the foremost understanding of a given recipe, i.e. the most popular version. So what we're going to do now is I've just put in a Google search for Food for the Gods.
I would add the word recipe.
And we're going to start from the most obscure and then quickly blitz our way up to the most popular. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you because I'm quite aware that I'm likely the only one this interested in this degree of recipe ancestry. But let's go. Alrighty.
If you're going, another ad popped up. If you're going to do something, do it right. Go full ham.
So we're starting off on a website called justapinch.com with a Food for the Gods recipe by a Miss Karen Dunn. And look at...
Hi, Karen. Hopefully you're not asking for a manager.
She's really looking at the camera. She is right up in there. She says this recipe has been in our family for years and years. And
yeah, it doesn't mean it's always good, but it does have a lot of the same stuff the first recipe had.
if we scroll down, oh, what do we see? Half a pound of chopped English walnuts. They really like the English walnuts. And the same amount of dates. So we've got walnuts, English walnuts, and dates again in the same quantities. But she uses, looky here, crushed soda crackers. So she uses soda cracker crumbs. Soda crackers are just saltines. However, this is the largest amount we've seen. 9 tablespoons. That's just... what is that if I do quick math? That's a half a cup plus a tablespoon. Yeah, so that's a lot, but it might just be a lot because if we see here, she uses 6 egg yolks and 6 egg whites. So she does separate the two. 2 cups of sugar, okie dokie, and again, the perennial 2 teaspoons of baking powder. If we scroll down to the method here.
Which very sounds like there was a legit recipe, but kind of got lost throughout time and just different people just slowly tweaked it.
What does she do? She makes the baking powder and the sugar, add to dates, nuts, egg yolks, and oh, okay. Whoa. She just throws everything into a bowl. The only thing she does separately is to beat the egg whites and fold them up. So they've been beaten stiff. So that's the same sort of method as our 1961 recipe, right? Which means that this recipe is going to essentially do the same thing as the last one, whereby the egg white meringue mixture is going to float to the top and get all crispy and quite hard, whilst the underneath with the egg yolks and the dates and the sugar is going to get quite chewy and leathery and omelet and eggy-like, which I didn't like about our 1961 recipe. Which is confirmed here as we see that she pours this into a 9x13 pan that hasn't been greased and bakes it at 350 for 30 minutes, which is the same amount of time.
Grease, always grease. It's just easier to get out. Or you use these ham spray. That works just as well.
That we baked the 1961 recipe. So these are probably going to have the same consistency, the same texture. So I suppose I did not do that incorrectly, but let's move on. Here we
Just skip that one.
have a Food for the Gods recipe from December 2007 from a personal blog called etherwork.net.
It looks like fruitcake.
And take a gander at these. Man, they look they look crispy, don't they? This small dish contains food for the gods in air quotes. Yeah, you're damn right about that. You know how some children's playgrounds have those like wood chips on the... That's good. Anyway, let's see the recipe. Oh, we don't actually have a written recipe.
You took a photo, you got that lazy, you typed everything else out. Just type it in.
taken a picture of a piece of paper, and obviously she's done so with a calculator. And computer enhance! All right, so she uses 2 cups of graham cracker crumbs. That's a lot. She says
1 cup of brown sugar. That's new. Dates. More nuts. 2 eggs and
Mother's recipe says 10 graham crackers. Well, Mother knows best. Why are you disrespecting her? A cup of brown sugar. This is the first time we have seen brown sugar. Cup of chopped dates. Again, we're used to. Cup of chopped nuts. This lady did not specify. She says she used cashews. She only uses 2 eggs, so this is going to be comparatively dry. She mixes everything together, and she used a 9x12 pan. I don't know where people are finding these arbitrary sizes. The most interesting thing about this is she rolls them in sugar, white sugar, as you can see up here. Well, as you won't be able to see because she's, God, this is like in my nightmares. What is this? Here's a recipe on a Spartan-looking page on recipegoldmine.com. Looking at the ingredients, we have...
This is how you post an recipe. Because it's like, look, here's all you things you'll need. This is how you do it. Have fun.
3 eggs. We're used to that. We're not used to a tablespoon of milk. What's that for? I have no idea. Probably just good luck. Moving on, we have 10 graham crackers, just like Mama used, rolled into crumbs. Okay, so here's graham cracker crumbs again. Cup of brown sugar. 2 teaspoons of baking powder makes the return. The last strange, wood chips recipe didn't have it, understandably. We have a return of the walnuts and a return of the dates. There's no separation of egg whites and egg yolks. Baked in a greased 8-inch at 350 for 30 to 40 minutes. And when cool, spread with butter icing. Interesting. So this is like a butter icing, like a buttercream, I suppose, and topped with walnuts. So that's about the most interesting thing about this recipe. But what have we next? Here's one on CakeCentral.
We need just legit, this is the cooking site. At least this one tells you how many people looked at it.
Written by Anonymous with the descriptor light and eggy. Now, of course, I'm fond of the word eggy because I use it enough, don't I? However, not when it comes to the taste or the smell or the texture. I really don't like that. Save that for my breakfast. But this person seems to think that's a good thing. To each their own, I suppose. But I do not reckon we need to spend too long on this because look at this ingredients list. We have seen this before. What is the method? Separate the eggs. Okay, so this is yolks and the whites separately. Oh, look! Beat the egg yolks until light and lemon colored. We have that repeat again. But looky here. Pour the batter into an ungreased loaf pan. That's 9x5. That is going to be really quite thick. So I'm curious as to what the texture to this one's going to be. Now here's a looker. This is a no-bake recipe for Food for the Gods on allrecipes.com. And looking at that, well, it's hard to because this was taken by a thermostat.
If you're taking photos, especially of stuff the big issue that this photo has to someone who went to school for photography, it's the camera doesn't know where it needs to focus. It should be focused here, but you have the plate, which what looks like it's in focused on, which means this is super close, so it's going to be slightly out of focus, and everything else is out of focus. So if you're looking to take photos, just put it on a surface, kind of like he has. It's just plain background, so you can just clearly, your camera
Dad?
You can clearly, look at it and go, oh, that's our subject.
Seemingly. Moving down to the ingredients list, this person uses whole graham crackers in addition to graham cracker crumbs. For the first time, we have butter. We have brown sugar, only 1 beaten egg, and gone are the dates, sharing something with the early 1909 recipes that I told you about from Boston that did not call for dates, but just generally dried fruit. But we do still have a cup of walnuts. But look here, there's an icing again. Half a cup of butter, evaporated milk, vanilla custard powder. You boil the butter, the sugar, you boil the egg too, and stir in the graham cracker crumbs. Oh, that just looks a right mess. Here is where we start getting into the meaty bits. This is a recipe for Food for the Gods on thequerinokitchen.com, written by a Miss Elizabeth Ann.
See, I mean, with the
And
photo.
she informed me of how popular something called Food for the Gods is over in the Philippines, especially around holidays and things. And her recipe...
look how clean that photo is. Simple background. Your digital camera will know right where to focus on. And yeah, the Asian countries are definitely multi-god. So yeah, so Food for the Gods would make sense.
Recipe here describes it as Food for the Gods, dates and raisins bars. And if we move down, looky, they kind of look like blondies, don't they? And taking a gander at
I don't know what Blondie's is, besides a band and know what I call my female friend.
The ingredients list, we can see that this is completely different. Here we have quite a lot of flour. Gone are the cracker crumbs. Quite a large amount of butter. There's a mixture of white and brown sugar. The whole eggs are there. Vanilla extract, combination of soda and powder. There's even molasses.
So, kind of like what I said with earlier, different regions, different gods, potentially different food for the gods.
So that's a cake. That's cake sponge type things right here. Completely different to what we've seen prior. But we have seen, again, the walnuts there. There's added raisins, but we also have our cup of chopped dates.
That could be a regional thing. No, dates to raisins.
Well, they look good just by taking a look at them, don't they? Which segues us arguably to the most popular food for the gods recipe I could find through a Google search, which lies on allrecipes.com again. And like the previous Filipino food for the gods that we saw, this...
Again, that's a beautiful photo. Clearly you have your subject. It's more or less the only thing in focus. Nothing else is trying to take your eyes away.
Resembles a blondie. It's a cake by the looks of it. Completely different to the ones that we were seeing previously through our searches. It's really quite got some meat.
Almost like the chocolate chips in there. But they're probably dates.
Something you can sink your teeth into. Again, yeah, this is flour based. Combination of baking powder, baking soda, salt. We got dates again, returns. Without boring you too much by staying on this page for too long, it looks to be just a batter.
Wow, and that is how you present a recipe. Right, it's step by step, but this is easily like task, like order of operations.
Method, like a cake method.
Like you do with your science experiments.
Start by creaming together your butter and your sugars. So if this is what the internet knows is food for the gods, why don't we give it a shot? So as per instructions, we have a cup of unsalted butter in this bowl, and we're starting with a cup of brown sugar and a cup of white sugar. I am telling you, once you discover sugar in a carton, it will change your life. Then we cream these two together. Yes, of course, you can use a mixer, but where's the fun in that? If you can't tell by my wrists, this is the only exercise I get anyway. Next, we beat in 3 eggies one at a time. Also, does anyone else put their shells back in the carton? Quite a few people find it gross, but honestly, I'm not bothered by it.
My dad does it. The only thing I don't like about it is if I go to make, cheesecake or chocolate cookies, and I go for an egg, I'm like, they're empty.
I'm just lazy. In goes number 2. Was getting sloppy. And finally, number 3. And you see, at this point, we're left with quite a silky smooth batter. This is completely different to the previous recipes we have done. But I mean, who's to say it's gonna be bad? Come now, in this bowl is a 1.25 cups of all-purpose flour sifted alongside a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now, the step prior to the beating together of butter and sugars and eggies and all of that nonsense asked us to take a 1/2 cup of this mixture and add it to our cup of chopped walnuts and cup of chopped dates. Now that's an old trick. The flouring of nuts and fruits and other add-ins before adding it to the batter proper to prevent all of this from sinking to the bottom of your pan whilst baking.
Really? I was trying to do a chocolate chip recipe, and every time we would do it, the chocolate chips would be kind of always on the bottom. Of course, when we flipped over, always on the top, but did not know that.
So that you do not end up with like a layer of just plain cake and then a stodgy clump of all of your add-ins at the very bottom. I'm going to do that. I have no qualms about that. But I am going to ask if you guys have any strong opinions on that. Do you swear by it? Do you say, no, it doesn't do anything? I've been told that it's a wives' tale, but we're gonna do it. Truly, I couldn't care less about sunken fruits. Heavens, that's how I feel half the time. But my reason for not doing this is just because there's a proclivity for flour to get stuck within the crevices of the dates and the walnuts and not fully mix into the batter whilst baking. So afterwards, you'll take a bite of something and amidst your nuts and your fruit is just plain uncooked flour. So that's my only reason for not doing this. But I often say when it comes to baking, if what you're doing works, don't let people tell you what to do. Right.
It's like superstitions in sports. Maybe stupid to somebody, but if it works, it works.
So before we fold everything together, I'm just going to grease this here 9x13 pan, which has been fitted with a parchment sling. And that's just a piece of parchment paper which has been cut so that its two ends are exceeding the sides of the pan. And I'm just going to be using Pam, which sounds like pan, but isn't. Pam, the pan?
Yeah, Pam is I put that with my cinnamon rolls, pop right out.
The pan. First in goes the flour mixture. La da 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 da. Oh lord. In go the floured nuts and dates.
Oh, that looks quite lovely.
And the oven is almost preheated, so let's get this into the pan. I think we're about ready. Oh, good timing. So this goes in at 350 for 10 minutes, but then we do actually reduce the heat to 300 degrees Fahrenheit for a half hour to 40 minutes. Showtime.
It's overcomplicated.
All right, take a look at this. It smells amazing. So we need to let this cool, and then we cut it specifically to 36 bars. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Okay, I might need to invest in that parchment paper. That was a clean trick.
And this is what we are left with, the most popular recipe for food for the gods on the internet. And I mean, it doesn't really look like the picture, does it? But it seldom does, let's be honest.
All about how it tastes. With him, it's always his face. You can tell if he likes it or not. Just like either his eyes will sink or his eyes will pop. Eyebrows up. He likes it.
Oh, wow. It's good. I like it, but it's very rich and it's very fatty. If you take a look at the proportions of the recipe, there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio between the butter and the flour. So it makes sense as to why it's this oily. But with that being said, it's good. It's a good variation on a blondie. That's also why I didn't stop my mission here, because there are a lot of blondies in the world. It is cakey, and there are a lot of cakes in the world. It did not get me as excited as that first 1909 recipe with its unique combination of texture and flavors. So with this being explored, how about we rewind a little bit?
You should just wing it and go on it yourself. All right, I have a recipe. Let's see what I create.
Yes, if it wasn't painfully obvious by now, I have baked all of these before. I have been through this gauntlet just a few times, because let me tell you, healthy experimentation is a necessary process toward the goal of writing a cookbook.
Yep. Granted, I never wrote a cookbook, but trying to figure out what works best for your style or what you like is. Like me, I like a big, fluffy, soft cookie. My dad thinks soft cookies are stale, so he prefers a little more crunch. Goofing around with a cookie recipe, we find a mix.
Speaking of, in my cookbook Baking Yesteryear, you will find my recipe for food for the gods situated within the 1900s section. Specifically, you'll find it on page 32. And you'll find it nestled quaintly within the aughts because it has indeed been derived from our first 1909 Michigan Federation Food for the Gods recipe. However, it has since been rewritten, adapted, workshopped, and vetted to be not only replicable, but if I dare say, better. So with mine, I began by slashing the recipe in.
Well, yes, you made it. With modern technology and actual instructions, it should be better.
In half. So instead of being based on the whites of 6 eggs, my recipe is instead based upon the whites of 3. The largest change that I made was increasing the dry ingredient proportions, the cracker crumb proportions in regard to wet by nearly 3-fold. And I did indeed specify the usage of graham cracker crumbs because I really quite like that flavor, that nuttiness. Plus, like the Filipino varieties or some of the cakey varieties of food for the gods that we saw, I like the fact that you could sink your teeth into those, right? They had some bite and they held up on their own. Because let's face it, near most anything served with whipped cream is bound to taste good. So that was the reasoning behind increasing the graham cracker crumb proportions. Plus, it actually helps prevent a lot of the weeping that we saw with that first recipe. Another
Nothing wrong with a good cry. You go with different style weeping. I don't know.
thing that I really quite respected about the Filipino varieties and some of the other 1909 recipes that I was telling you about was the fact that they did not restrict themselves to only dates. Sometimes they had raisins in addition to dates, or sometimes raisins and a whole other host of dried fruits in place of dates, which is why in my recipe, you'll find that I actually call for dried apricots. Why? Because not only were they widely used at the time, but because they slap. I'm beginning to realize
Don't hit people.
that I'm likely boring you to death by just being sat here wagging my chin. So shall we bake the bloody thing?
Wagging your chin. Oh, that's a new one. No, I'm a hockey player. There's chirping, jawing. No, there's a lot of ways to say that you're talking.
Let's begin by appeasing the French and getting everything in place before...
Screw the French.
before we even deal with the whites of the eggies. Starting with cracker crumbs. Now you can go ahead and use the pre-made variety. I'm quite a big fan of these myself. I use them a lot in things like pie crusts. However, I don't think they taste as good. Plus, you need to watch the sodium on these, the salt on these, depending on the brand you use. You can end up adding in a lot more than you're intending. So if you use pre-made crumbs, maybe reduce the salt that you'll end up seeing later on. But returning to the subject of flavor and taste, I actually prefer using whole graham crackers and then rolling them into my own crumbs. Specifically, I like to use the National Biscuit Company's graham crackers. I think they taste a little better.
Nabisco. The National Biscuit Company. It's just called Nabisco.
However, I reckon it's simply just because I'm a fan of history. I'm told that this variety is a lot more prevalent. However,
it's still a Nabisco.
If you're anything like me and you inhabit any of His Majesty's territories, you're not going to be coming across graham crackers.
Nope. I'm Irish, so no. Screw the crown.
Very easily. So a lot of bakers will tell you to substitute in equal measure things like digestive biscuits all crumbed up. However, I'm a big fan of using malted milk biscuits, specifically Tesco's variety, all made into crumbs, so give that a shot if you're so inclined. With my recipe, we will be needing a half cup of cracker crumbs, meaning this shall be more than enough. Now you can go ahead and make your own cracker crumbs in a food processor. However, I have this crazy theory. Can I prove it? No.
No, it's something I just kind of noticed throughout like his videos. He needs one of those mics that clips right here because his volume kind of bounces up and down, and also sometimes he sounds farther away. Like right now, like kind of pitch in his voice really changed. I need a better mic, but I should sound one tone because I'm mere like 2 feet from my microphone, 3 feet the max.
I think that physical labor tastes good. This also goes along with my core philosophy of believing that one does not need any fancy kitchen equipment to make things that taste good.
No, it just makes life so much easier.
Make sure your crumbs are very fine. It's quite paramount. Perfect. I of course kept the walnuts, but because the recipe is now in half, we'll only be needing a half cup chopped. I want a black walnut tree. Now for the half cup of chopped dried apricots.
Probably saving money.
Make sure that these are chopped particularly fine because elsewise they can be quite chewy. Also, I'm surprised you've not made a comment on my quantity of bananas back there. Look, I'm a lonely man. Now, I've had many a conversation
No, because I figured at some point you would make that joke.
with a great number of people who seem to hate old cookbooks simply because of how vague or open-ended they can be in regard to their add-ins, in regard to their ingredients. I.e. many cookbooks from the 1900s, 1910s, right the way up through the 60s might just say, add in a
Careful of your knife, good sir.
half cup of nuts.
No, it's like firearm safety, man. You don't want to accidentally, like, basic safety.
Or half a cup of dried fruit. Whereas people today seem to quite prefer just to be told what to use, right? Tell me to use raisins. Don't leave it up to me. I don't want to have to think. I'm being facetious now, but truthfully, baking was quite different back then. It was more so about utilizing what you had lying about your kitchen to make something of sustenance than it was strictly adhering to what a recipe was supposed to be.
Also, you had, like, different geographical locations. Some places had apples, some people had, like, oranges. So it's kind of like, hey, use fruit. Well, here's the local fruit of my area, so you can get the same recipe with different tastes just based on location.
Take my recipe, for example. I called for half a cup of dried apricots because 1, the flavor profile in tandem with graham crackers I think is brilliant. 2, they were widely used at the time. However, I still keep the suggestion, the historical suggestion of dates alongside the suggestion that you can use any dried fruit. Use currants if you got them. Are you a Fig Newton fanatic? Use figs. This is our half cup of dried apricots, and I seem to have cut too much. What a shame. Guess I'll have to have a snack. We also need 1 cup of granulated sugar at the ready. So for my recipe, I call for a 9-inch spring form fitted with a parchment round, and we are going to lightly grease both the parchment and the sides. And then I actually like to go in with a paper towel and spread it around, plus
I do the same thing. I was going to make the suggestion.
wipe out any excess. No.
Not just wipe out any excess. It's just the spray sometimes will spray. It's just like a shotgun blast. It's going to hit the baked surface area, but there might be sections in between that you'll miss. I have no idea of how like I'm looking on the camera because I'm like leaning against my wall so my feet don't fall back asleep.
No matter what you say, I still suits me. Only 3 egg whites this time. Now, what was simultaneously the most significant and insignificant
When I separate my eggs away from yolk, I actually use the eggs itself. Like I'll crack it, break it in half, and do it that way. But that's me being fancy.
addition in my recipe was simply the use of salt. I call for a half teaspoon. It really needed it because it's quite a sweet dessert. We actually beat the half teaspoon with the egg whites. Again, watch the sodium in your graham crackers or your graham cracker crumbs. You'd be surprised at how wildly they can vary between brands. If you want to be safe, do just use a quarter teaspoon.
It's like it's staring at me.
For the egg whites, I ask us to beat them stiff, and then once they're stiff, we gradually beat in the sugar, 2 tablespoons at a time, until stiff and glossy. So this is what you're looking for when beating egg whites stiff. The peak should be standing straight up, not flopping over, even when you move it around. Do not underestimate the amount of time this takes. This took me about 6-7 minutes. At which
Dedication, my friend, dedication. But then again, you want that.
point we fold in the cracker crumbs, but not all at once. And that just aids in even distribution. And then our chopped dried fruit and our chopped walnuts. Oh, look at that. Look at that. It even smells good. Yes, for the pan, I do instruct the use of a 9-inch springform with a parchment round, both lightly greased. It just makes things a lot easier and a lot less messy. However, I also realize that not everyone has a springform. And my philosophy with my cookbook is that I never wanted anyone to feel left out. So, you can
go out and buy one at your local store. They're probably like not even $20.
actually make my food for the gods recipe in a standard 9-inch pie plate. Pie pan, if you have one. Just have a parchment round in the bottom, lightly grease that, and lightly grease the sides. Just know that it might come out looking a little bit gnarly. So if you don't care about appearances, and you don't have a springform, go to town. But just dollop this in evenly, then you lightly press down and even it out, trying not to move the parchment. Do smooth the top as best you can. And then into the oven at 325 Fahrenheit for about 35 to 40 minutes, and by then the top should be a pale gold color. So as one can see, the difference in at least ingredients between my recipe and the original 1909 recipe was not that magnitudinous. Sure, I switched up the dry ingredient proportions. I added some salt. I got rid of the baking powder, which is not needed in meringues, right? If you do your meringue properly, you're going to get enough leavening, enough air bubbles, enough lift. And, you know, even if baking powder were to add a bit more leavening, it makes it even more hormonal and liable to fall if you don't do things absolutely correctly. So yeah, the changes with regard to ingredients was not that major. And that's for good reason, because you go about switching things up too much and you're no longer going to have a food for the gods.
Things I would change would be, I probably use peanuts and chocolate chips instead of fruits, because I'm a fat kid.
Recipe from 1909. In my mind, this is a great way of staying true to the original recipe and making it replicable, and that latter point is what recipe development is all about. Most of my work with this recipe, and indeed the greater cookbook, came from workshopping the method, because as I think I've proven, the recipes in old cookbooks are spotty, to say the least. So it has been 40 minutes and this looks good, so what I'm going to do is turn off the oven, actually leave the pan within the oven, and crack the door. Leave the door ajar for about 30 minutes to allow this to dry.
We call that heating the house, because the whole house is electric, so you turn on the oven, it quickly heats up, and then you crack it, and next thing you know, your house is your kitchen's warmer.
Which is a bit of a nonsense term. What we're really just doing is allowing this to come to room temperature less intrusively, which helps to guard against cracking. And your oven should actually have an indentation, much like a car door at this point, which I like to think is specifically for this purpose.
Oh, no, sir. It is so you can stand there, flip up your sweatshirt or shirt, allow the heat get inside. It's to warm yourself up and smell the food.
Before you do this, if it doesn't look done, even at 40 minutes, if it's still moving up and down or breathing, so to speak, you can leave it in the oven at temperature past 40 minutes. This is most likely to happen if you're using a pie pan, and if that pie pan happens to be glass. I've never liked the baking characteristics of glassware, especially when...
Oh, I would not want that, just because of the fact that, like, I'm a normal-sized giant, if that's the way I describe it. I am like 6'4", 220, so I bump and drop things somewhat. So that's why I like Tupperware cups instead of actual glass, because I don't want to break stuff.
Paired with a parchment round, the bottom has a tendency to get undercooked and gooey, and no one likes a soggy bottom, as we all know. Okay, the half hour is up, which means we are just going to take it out of the oven and then let it cool to room temperature completely. That's very important, and that should only take about 20 to 30 minutes. Once completely cool, run a thin, sharp knife along the edge. And behold the beauty of my recipe. Woo!
Okay, actually looks pretty good.
And then with a cutting board at the ready, all you need to do is invert gently, remove, and then just take off the parchment paper. Voila! So in this manner, my recipe is a tort. Not a tort in the sense of a multi-layered filled cake, but tort in the sense of a cake that is not bound by flour, but rather nuts or crumbs. This, of course, being graham cracker crumbs. It's very similar to a dacquoise. And the great
A what, sir?
thing about my recipe is that it can be sliced. Ooh. Just by visualizing it, I hope you can see how incredibly unique this texture is. All right, here we go. And I'm
Yes, but it would have been a lot better with a less rounded of a plate.
just gonna pick it up. Oh. I mean, it's just heaven.
Of course, you're going to thoroughly enjoy it. You put it in your cookbook.
Truthfully, it is. It's got that nice slight airiness like that of a French macaron, yet the chewiness, the bright notes of the apricot, contrasted with the nuttiness of not only the walnuts, right, but the graham cracker crumbs. And it's all in this very unique, chewy, marshmallowy, airy package, yet a very delicate crispness on top. It's fantastic. Because let's face it, we've had the pies, we've had the cakes, we've served the cookies. We love them, but they're familiar. The past has proven to me to hold so many new, exciting varieties and desserts, such as food for the gods. And I think it's just the most wonderful thing. But of course, they aren't new, are they? They're just begging to be rediscovered. And that's what Baking Yesteryear is all about, if you don't mind my saying.
Let's look at his cover for a half second with him holding up.
And I think it's just the most wonderful thing. But of course, they aren't new, are they? They're just begging to be rediscovered. And that's what Baking Yesteryear...
Pause. First off, you get a nice surfboard to ride this wave he has going right here. He has the people's eyebrow going right now. You know, the Rock thing. Yeah, he's definitely a bow tie person. The cover looks good. It's a good cover.
Is all about, if you don't mind my saying. Yes, it is chock full of all things wild, wacky, and wonderful. I've crammed 101 recipes in here for you. Everything from unique dessert perspectives like food for the gods to fan favorites that I've done on my TikTok, and of course plenty of beloved classics. I do hope that today's exploration gave at least a little bit of insight into the effort and the work I put into Baking Yesteryear and the rest of its 100 recipes. Honestly, it is a child of mine, and I am very proud of it. With that being said, I still can't in good conscience keep this recipe from you, so even if you don't want to buy the book, I understand. You'll still find my recipe for Food for the Gods in the description below, and I'll also pop in the original 1909 Michigan Federation recipe if you want to give that a crack. Elsewise, thank you kindly for sticking around for this long, and I hope to be seeing you quite soon.
I do actually. I am. Am I subscribed to? Yeah, I'm subscribed. But yeah, Food of the God. I'm not a big fan to like the fruits and veggies, so I would probably add in like chocolate chips. I think it was my second or third video on YouTube. I did a cooking video, where I made cheesecake, and as I'm scrolling on my phone to get down to where it is. It is my fourth video. Fourth video ever, and it only hits 18 views. So that is a treat. It also has the old American flag bandana, which I do like the bandanas, but this thing I can lean up against stuff with this on. It's a lot smoother. But that's it. That's all I had. Check out his cookbook. I probably will end up buying it when it comes out, which is strange because I'm an extremely picky eater, so I probably won't eat none of the stuff. So, but then again, I kind of really like his style, his presentation, and the fact that it helps kind of grow my channel a bit. Actually, a lot of it. But that's it. That is all I have. I will see you weird people later.